Okay, we're going to get started. Welcome to New Hampshire Department Office of Nutrition Program Services. We have adapted USDA's local meal charge policy presentation for SAUs, SFAs can be used for school administration, school boards, and school staff. This presentation is a starting point for school food authorities interested in providing a formal training on their local meal charge policy. This training is designed for an audience of SAU, SFA staff members responsible for implementing and enforcing the local meal charge policy, but can be adapted for different audiences as needed. Next slide, please. Welcome to our fifth information buffet. I am Tam Feener, a program specialist for the New Hampshire Education Department, Office of Nutrition Programs and Services. Joining us today is our NSLP team, Ruth Howard and Kelly Rambo. With this information buffet, we are delighted to offer these bite-sized learning opportunities with a time dedicated for questions and answers at the end. We are recording this webinar and we'll make it available on our YouTube channel. Please feel free to enter questions as they arise into the chat. We will hold off on answering questions until the end of our presentation. Any questions we are unable to get to, we will be sending answers out to the field. Thank you for joining us today. Next slide, please. Here is the menu of the day: USDA requirement, local charge policy, policy communication strategy, preventing unpaid meal charges, preventing lunch shaming, resources, and questions and answers. Next slide, please. Local charge policy requirements. Now we will transition into the overview of USDA's local charge policy requirement. A template link is being provided to SAUs, SFAs to use at the local level. This template link will be added to the chat box and shown on the resource page at the end of this PowerPoint. Next slide, please. Why does USDA require a local meal charge policy? In 2010, Congress required USDA to examine and report on charge and alternate meal policies and practices of state agencies and school districts. Congress also required USDA to report on the feasibility of establishing national standards and, if applicable, to make recommendations for implementation. In the years that followed, USDA gathered information from a variety of places with a special focus on input from state and local stakeholders. USDA solicited comments through a request for information in the Federal Registry, hosted 2 interactive public webinars, held a roundtable discussion with organizations working on education and hunger issues nationwide, and learned from formal studies that provided information about how the issue of unpaid meal charges impacts schools across the country. After this examination, USDA had a better understanding of where clarification was needed and how USDA could best support the nation's schools. Rather than adopt a federal meal charge policy, USDA decided to give local SAUs, SFAs discretion to determine what policy would best meet the needs of their students. USDA requirement local charge policies. This slide provides general overview of USDA's local charge policy requirement. All SFA operating national school lunch program and/or school breakfast program must have a written policy. to address situations where children participating at the reduced price or paid rate do not have money to cover the cost of a meal at the time of meal service. SAUs, SFAs have discretion to develop in the specifics of their policies, which USDA anticipates will vary based on local circumstances and resources available to the SFA. USDA requirements communication. USDA also requires SFAs to ensure the policy is provided in writing to all families at the start of the school year and to families with children transferring to the SFA during the school year. There are a variety of ways to meet this requirement, and the USDA allows SFAs to choose the option that works best for them. USDA encourages SFAs to share the policy with families in a variety of ways to make sure everyone gets the message. SFAs are also required to provide the written meal charge policy in writing to all schools or SFA level staff members responsible for policy enforcement. This includes food service professionals responsible for collecting payment for meals at the point of service, staff involved in notifying families of low or negative balances, and staff who enforce any other aspects of the meals charge policy. USDA also recommends social workers, nurses, and homeless liaisons, and other school staff members assisting children in the need are also informed of the policy. USDA requirement record keeping. To ensure compliance with this requirement, USDA requires SFAs to keep a copy of the local meal charge policy on hand for the administrative review. Retain all documents for 3+ current years. SFA are also required to maintain documentation of the method used to communicate the policy to households and to staff responsible for policy enforcement. USDA recommends, while SFAs have discretion to develop the specifics of their policy, USDA does have some general recommendations for local officials to keep in mind. USDA encourages SFAs to balance the importance of staying in the black with the importance of making sure participating students have adequate nutrition during the school day. Denying children a meal could lead to poor performance due to hunger, whereas providing a regular reimbursable meal ensures children have a well-balanced nutrition that they need to focus in school and in class. USDA also discourages what some refer as lunch shaming, or the singling out of children with unpaid meal charges. We will talk about some of these strategies in preventing lunch shaming at our schools in a few minutes.
Local charge policy. USDA's training template for meal charging policy has, to the extent possible, provided a framework for SFAs to fill in their own content for their local meal charge policy. Given the variation in policy content, SFAs should take care to make sure this section is adapted to fully address their policy. Next slide, please. Thank you. The training template can be used to share information about the steps the SFA may take to develop their local charge policy. SFAs are encouraged to take a transparent approach so that school food professionals responsible for enforcing the policy will have an opportunity to learn about the policy development process. Possible examples include inviting key stakeholders. This might include school administrators, school board members, school food service professionals, social workers, families, and students to provide input on the policy's content. Tracking unpaid meal charges over time in order to tailor the policy to the magnitude of the problem. Investigating the reasons why children are accruing debt. For example, are financially secure families just forgetting to add money to their account? Are low-income families failing to submit an application for free or reduced price meals? And be sure to review USDA guidance materials. USDA recommends that SFAs address the following topics along with any other topics they determine their audience should be aware of. How will the SFA notify families of low or negative balances? How many reminders will a family receive, and how will those reminders be sent? Who will be responsible for sending these reminders? Are children unable to pay for their meal allowed to charge a meal? If so, is there a limit to the number of charges or a dollar limit allowed? Does the charge limit vary by grade level, or is it the same for all children? What type of meal will children with meal charge debt receive? Regular reimbursable meal or an alternate meal? If children receive an alternate meal, are they charged a nominal fee or provided the meal at no cost? What are the consequences for families that fail to repay a debt? Are resources available to assist families struggling to pay back a debt? Please note, a local meal charging policy is a requirement for operating USDA child nutrition programs. USDA recommends that SFAs address the following topics along with any other topics they determine staff should be aware of. How and when will families be notified of the policy? How and when will families of transfer students be notified of the policy? How and when will staff members responsible for policy enforcement be notified of the policy? Along with the required communication strategies we just covered, here are some other ways your school can help get the word out about the SAU local charge policy. Include a letter explaining the policy when sending folders with school information home with students. Post the policy on your school website and social media sites used by students and families. Include the policy in print and in online versions of student handbooks. Include the policy in other written communications to families, such as monthly school newsletters, cafeteria menus, etc. Please be sure the USDA FNS Civil Rights Non-Discrimination Statement is included on all communications regarding school meals.
Okay, now we're at preventing unpaid meal charges. This section describes best practices for preventing unpaid meal charges that USDA encourages SFAs to share with schools. These methods were identified as helpful strategies in USDA's examination of unpaid meal charges. SFAs are encouraged to adapt this section to highlight the strategies that work best for their community. Reach all eligible children. SAUs, SFAs understand that sometimes families need extra assistance and encouragement to successfully complete an application for school meals. Your SAU can help our families by offering assistance with the application process and by being available to answer questions. For example, you can host a school meals booth during school events and provide information about where families can find application assistance during parent-teacher conferences. This type of assistance is especially important to families facing language and literacy barriers. Please remember to download and retain direct certification lists. USDA requires a minimum of 3 times a school year. Reach children mid-year. SAUs, can help remind families that applications for free reduced meals can be submitted at any time during the school year. This is especially important for families who may have experienced a change in eligibility status due to financial setback. Many low-income families lack sufficient savings, make them vulnerable to financial emergencies such as a job loss. USDA requires schools to make applications available at any time during the school year, but you should actively remind families that they can apply at any time. Supporting transfer families during their transition to a new school is also important. When a student transfers within a school district, their eligibility for free or reduced price meals must transfer with them. When a student transfers from another district, USDA encourages schools to accept the eligibility determination of the transfer child's former school district. Accepting a child's previous eligibility determination could help prevent a child from increasing their unpaid meal charges. Next slide, please. Provide payment options. Taking steps to make payment more convenient for families can help reduce unpaid meal charges. For instance, encouraging families to prepay for meals can help children maintain consistent access to meals without accruing unpaid meal charges. Additionally, allowing families to add money to their child's account from a computer or mobile device can make payment more convenient and efficient, and can also help parents and guardians take their child's balance regularly. Some online payment platforms include an optional feature that automatically adds money to the account when they reach a set dollar amount, preventing the account from going negative. And finally, repayments plans can help make the process of, repayment plans can help make the process of paying back meal charges more manageable for families, especially those families facing a financial setback. Some families may be unable to pay back a debt all at once, but may be able to pay it off a little at a time. For example, with biweekly payments. Provide payment reminders. Schools can encourage families to regularly check their account balance and track their child's spending. Some households may simply forget to add money to their child's account and unknowingly have a balance lower than they expected. This could occur, for instance, if a child is purchasing food a la carte along with their reimbursable meals. Schools are encouraged to proactively remind families of their child's low account balance before it goes negative. Schools may send discreet payment notices home with students or send notices directly to family email accounts. Generally, payments reminders suggesting that all families keep tabs on their account balances could be included in the school newsletter, on a lunch menu, or in other communication materials regularly sent to all families. In this case, it is recommended that schools check in periodically with families to ensure contact information is up to date and accurate. Offset cost from unpaid meals. The last strategy we'll share is to find an alternative funding source to offset costs incurred from unpaid meals. Depending on the circumstances at your school, the funding strategy will look different. Here are a few options to help kickstart your brainstorming. Schools across the country have worked with community organizations and donors to collect funds to cover some of their unpaid meal costs. Some schools have designated a random acts of kindness fund or angel fund, where these donations may be stored for use by children with meal charges. Additionally, schools can invite families with excess funds in their child's account to donate to a general lunch fund at the end of the school year. A few dollars from many families, such as those with graduating seniors who will be closing their accounts, can help to cover the cost of meal charges in the future. Schools can consider alternative funding to be an add-on strategy to use alongside other best practices we are sharing today. Schools should not become reliant on donated funds, as priorities and circumstances for donors change. Long-term strategies can include ensuring all eligible children are certified for free meals and improving communication with families.
Preventing lunch shaming. Now we'll share a few strategies your school can use to prevent lunch shaming. We know that no one here wants to cause a child distress during the school day, and using these strategies can prevent that from happening. Schools are encouraged to communicate privately and directly with adults in the child's household. Discreet communication with families is a far better option than communicating with or through the child, as the child might be embarrassed if the communication occurs in front of other students. For example, instead of sending a clearly marked notice home with a child who has an outstanding balance, we recommend sending confidential reminders in a plain white envelope or folded, stapled, and labeled with the responsible adult's name. Using brightly colored paper for these notifications can be a helpful tip. These reminders could even be sent with other communications from the school, such as reminders about an upcoming field trip or school event. Certainly, some SAUs have the ability to use email to communicate with parents. That's another great way. Next slide, please. Avoid singling out students. You might have seen stories in the news about school lunch shaming. Some of these stories have highlighted cases where food service workers have thrown a child's meal in the trash after learning the child is unable to pay. We do not want a story like that coming out of your schools or to our office. Please note, what your school communicates will vary depending on whether the SFA has a no charge policy, limited charge policy, or allows meal charges. Even if the SFA has a no charge policy, USDA does not recommend throwing a child's meal in the trash if they are unable to pay. If the meal has already been served, this approach would embarrass the child and it would not save the SFA any money. In addition, schools should be discouraged from using hand stamps, stickers, or other visual markers to identify children with unpaid meal charges. Alternate meals. Alternate meals have also been a recent topic in the news. Many schools have been criticized for serving children with unpaid meal charges meals that are noticeably different from the regular reimbursable meal. Schools are encouraged to take steps to avoid singling out children with unpaid balances. Providing a simple, low-cost, reimbursable alternate meal as a regular menu item is one option that will help ensure children unable to pay will not be the only children eating the alternate meal. This strategy allows schools to continue to receive reimbursement at the reduced or paid rate, even if the student payment for the meal is not collected. Other considerations. We encourage schools to consider whether the benefits of potential school lunch debt collections outweigh the costs incurred to achieve those collections. For example, a debt for one meal purchase isn't as serious a concern as a large debt that is accumulated over time. Schools recognize that their staff members are busy juggling many priorities and should focus their resources where they will have the greatest positive impact on participating children. It is also recommended that schools establish procedures to determine whether children with meal charges are eligible for free or reduced meals when considering their debt collection strategy. Potentially eligible families should be encouraged to apply for benefits. Give USDA and ONPS your feedback. And remember, although it is not required, USDA encourages SFAs to revise their meal charging policy on a regular basis.
Okay, so we're getting towards the end of our presentation. Remember to include the updated USDA non-discrimination statement on any communication about child nutrition programs. New Hampshire requires that USDA non-discrimination statement is included in school menus. It can be the short form, this institution is an equal opportunity provider. Okay, so we're at 156. So do we have any questions in the chat box? Kelly?
We have one question from Megan. Can we email the policy to families, or does it have to be a paper copy of the policy to families?
Oh, that's a good question. You know, what we're going to do, we're going to get in touch with USDA and get right back to you on that question. But that's a really good question. Thank you.
We have one more additional. Jody would like to know where we can get a copy of the PowerPoint.
Oh, well, right now we're going to look into that. We usually don't pass out the PowerPoint. However, it is on the YouTube. We're going to have it on our YouTube channel. So you'll be able to review it then. And it was recorded. So that's a great way to revisit this PowerPoint presentation.
And that is all we have for questions in the chat.
Okay, great. So thank you everyone for joining us today. And Ruth, you're up.
I thought you were doing beautifully. Yes, as Tam said, thank you for joining us today. We appreciate your time and attention to this important issue. Please don't hesitate to contact us if you have follow-up questions or feedback about this topic. We are here to help.
Thank you, everyone.
Have a great afternoon. I just was pointing so that you finish reading the sentence. I didn't care if I had to read it. You were on a roll. We need to sneak in rum flavor positives.
I'm a rum cake.
Rum cake.
Uh-oh. You can hear us?
Damn.